It was supposed to be just another sunny afternoon in the middle of nowhere. But on that day, under the burning desert sun, a woman knelt in the sand, her clothes soaked, her tears blending with the dust. Behind her stood a man in a black suit, the very man who once promised to love her. And beside him, laughter echoed, a younger woman smirking as if cruelty was entertainment. They said karma moves slow, but sometimes it strikes right when pride blinds the heart. He thought mocking his wife's body made him powerful, that her pain was invisible, that her silence was weakness. What he didn't know was that life has a way of flipping the script. When the one you humiliate becomes the mirror reflecting your own ugliness. That day something broke. Not just her heart, but the illusion that love can survive without respect. And as the sun sank over the endless sand, a single truth began to unfold. When you destroy someone who would have given you the world finds a way to destroy you back. This is the story of how cruelty met its reckoning. Before everything shattered, their life looked almost perfect from the outside. Marcus and Lila had been married for 7 years, living in a quiet desert town where the days were long and the nights silent enough to hear your own thoughts. Lila, warm-hearted and soft-spoken, spent her mornings tending to a small garden behind their modest home. She loved to cook, to laugh, and to take pictures of the sunrise, the only thing that never judged her. Marcus, however, had changed. Once a kind man who adored his wife's every flaw, he'd grown cold over the years. His new job in the city had inflated his ego, and his confidence turned into arrogance. He started seeing her not as his partner, but as a burden, someone who didn't fit the image of the successful man he wanted the world to see. He stopped walking beside her in public, stopped introducing her to colleagues. He called it a phase, but to Lila it felt like disappearing in slow motion. Each insult, each passing remark about her weight, chipped away at the woman she used to be.
Still, she tried.
She believed love could fix what pride had broken. She cooked his favorite meals, smiled through the silence, and hoped that maybe one day he'd look at her the way he once did, like she was his whole world. But Marcus's world had shifted. A woman from his office, elegant and lean, had caught his eye. Her name was Tanya, a symbol of everything he believed he wanted. She laughed at his jokes, admired his ambition, and didn't remind him of who he used to be. Lila noticed the changes, the late nights, the faint smell of perfume that wasn't hers, the sudden obsession with expensive suits and gym routines. But she stayed quiet, convincing herself that maybe she was just overthinking it. The turning point came one evening when Marcus returned home early. Lila was baking bread, humming softly to herself. He looked at her, flour on her hands, a smile on her face, and felt only disgust. He muttered something under his breath, something cruel enough to make her freeze. Then louder so she could hear it all. No wonder people stare. Look at you. You're a joke, Lila. The bread burned in the oven, but neither of them moved. That night, as the desert wind howled outside, something inside her went still. Love hadn't died. It had been humiliated into silence. And in that silence, karma began to listen. Days turned into weeks, and Lila felt herself fading inside her own home. The walls that once echoed with laughter now stood silent, cold and heavy with judgment. Marcus barely spoke to her anymore, except when he wanted to remind her of what she wasn't. He would scroll through his phone at dinner, showing her pictures of fitness models and saying, "That's what dedication looks like." He said it casually like it was advice, but each word landed like a knife. Lila would lower her gaze, pretend not to care, and whisper a quiet prayer that maybe tomorrow he'd remember who she was beneath the body he mocked. But tomorrow never came. Marcus's obsession with Tanya grew stronger. She represented everything his pride craved: validation, admiration, the illusion of a better life. They began meeting secretly after work, at restaurants far from town. Tanya liked the attention, the luxury he offered, the thrill of stealing something that wasn't hers. She laughed when he joked about Lila's size, and Marcus took comfort in her cruelty. Together they turned Lila into a punchline. One afternoon, Lila found a message on his phone, Tanya's words glowing like poison. She must eat her feelings, huh? Poor thing. That was the moment Lila realized it wasn't just betrayal, it was humiliation. Still, she said nothing. She packed his clothes, washed his dishes, and smiled through her tears. She believed that silence was strength, that forgiveness might somehow save her soul even if it couldn't save her marriage. But fate was listening. When Tanya suggested Marcus file for divorce, he agreed, but not before one last cruel performance. He told her he wanted to teach Lila a lesson. They planned a weekend talk in the desert at an old cabin his uncle once owned. Lila thought it was a chance to fix things. She even baked him his favorite cake, her heart foolishly hoping for mercy. When they arrived, the truth hit her like a storm. Tanya was there smiling. Marcus handed Lila a suitcase and told her to take her things and leave. Lila stood frozen, her throat dry, her voice trembling. "Marcus, what is this?" He smirked. "It's freedom. For both of us." Then came the laughter. Tanya's cruel, echoing laugh that cut through the wind. Marcus opened the suitcase, pulling out her clothes one by one and tossing them into the sand. "You wanted attention?" He sneered. "Now you've got it." Lila's eyes filled with tears. "Please, stop. You're hurting me." But he didn't stop. He took a bucket of water from the car, meant for cooling the engine, and poured it over her head. The water mixed with her tears and the dirt beneath her knees. Tanya clapped, delighted by the spectacle. In that moment, something broke inside Lila. Not her spirit, but her fear. She looked up at the man she once loved, and for the first time saw nothing human in his eyes. She didn't scream. She didn't beg. She just whispered, "You'll regret this." Marcus laughed, wiping his hands as if washing off her existence. They left her there, soaked, shivering, surrounded by silence. The desert watched quietly, the air still and heavy. But karma has a way of remembering. The next few days were strange. Marcus's car broke down halfway back to town. His business deal, one he'd bragged about for months, fell apart overnight when his partner discovered forged numbers. Tanya, who promised she'd stand by him, suddenly disappeared when the money dried up. At first he called it bad luck, but as the days went on it felt like something darker, like the universe was rearranging itself to make him see what he had done. Lila didn't return home. Neighbors whispered that she left town. But what Marcus didn't know was that she hadn't run away. She was rebuilding. Quietly, with dignity, she started working at a local shelter, helping women who'd been broken by cruelty just like hers. Each day she grew stronger. Meanwhile, Marcus's perfect life crumbled piece by piece. The company fired him for misconduct. His friends distanced themselves. And one morning, when he woke up to an empty house and silence that felt heavier than guilt, he realized that he'd become exactly what he once accused her of being: alone, unwanted, and invisible. For Lila, healing wasn't about revenge, it was about reclaiming herself. But karma had its own plans. Because one evening under that same desert sky where she had once been humiliated, fate would bring Marcus back to the very place his cruelty began. And this time he would face what true loneliness feels like. Weeks turned into months, but Marcus couldn't escape the shadow of what he'd done. Every night he replayed the desert in his head. The bucket, the laughter, the way Lila's eyes had gone quiet. The memory didn't fade. It followed him like a ghost. His business was gone. His reputation destroyed. Tanya had moved on to another man, the kind who actually respected her ambition, not her cruelty. And Marcus, stripped of his arrogance, was left with nothing but a cheap apartment and a mirror that refused to lie. He'd aged 10 years in a few months. The confidence that once fueled his pride now mocked him back. His body weakened. Stress and shame etched deep lines into his face. One night, a storm rolled across the desert, lightning flickering against the horizon. For reasons even he couldn't explain, Marcus got into his car and drove. The road stretched endlessly ahead, the same path he had taken that cruel day. The cabin still stood there, abandoned, half buried in sand. As he stepped out, the wind howled, carrying whispers that felt almost alive. He walked toward the spot where she had knelt, the memory sharp and unforgiving. Then he saw something. In the sand, half buried beneath the wind's shifting patterns, lay the charred remains of her old suitcase, the one he'd thrown away. Inside, still miraculously intact, was a photograph. It was of the two of them, taken years ago. Lila smiling, Marcus holding her waist. For a moment his knees gave out. He fell to the ground, clutching the picture as if it could breathe life back into what he'd destroyed. Thunder cracked overhead. The storm thickened, rain pelting down in sheets. Within minutes, the desert floor turned to mud. His car, parked a few meters away, began to sink slightly into the softening earth. Marcus rushed to it, but the wheels spun uselessly. He shouted for help, But there was no one. No laughter. No witnesses. Just him and the same unforgiving land where he'd broken someone's soul. Lightning struck nearby, lighting up the sand in ghostly white. The wind roared through the emptiness, and in its voice he could almost hear her. "You'll regret this." Panic consumed him. He stumbled, slipping into the mud, drenched, desperate. In the chaos, the bucket, the same one he'd left near the cabin, rolled across the sand, hitting his foot. It was as if the universe had returned his weapon of cruelty. He froze, trembling, staring at it. He collapsed beside it, the cold rain washing over him, just as he had once poured it over her. The irony cut deeper than the storm ever could. His body shook with sobs that came from somewhere raw and buried, part guilt, part realization. In that moment, Marcus understood that karma doesn't always punish through death. It punishes through reflection, through the unbearable weight of seeing yourself for what you truly are. By the time morning came, the storm had passed. The sun rose slowly over the horizon, and Marcus, exhausted and broken, sat in silence. The photograph of Lila lay on his lap, soaked but intact. He whispered her name. No one answered. The desert didn't need to. It had already done its job. The storm had ended, but Marcus was still sitting there, mud-soaked, hollow-eyed, holding a photograph that no longer belonged to him. For the first time in his life, he wasn't thinking about money, image, or control. He was thinking about her, about every word he'd thrown at Lila like a weapon, every moment she'd smiled through the pain he caused. Days later, a traveler passing by found his car half buried in the sand and knocked on the door of the old cabin. Inside, Marcus sat on the floor, alive, but barely. He hadn't eaten, hadn't slept, just kept whispering her name. The traveler took him back to town, where people barely recognized the once proud man. He was no longer Marcus, the confident businessman. He was Marcus, the man who had destroyed his own life and now lived with ghosts. Meanwhile, miles away in another town, Lila's life had changed entirely. She had built something beautiful from her pain, a women's support organization named Second Dawn. It wasn't grand, but it was real. Dozens of women came every week seeking comfort, hope, and the strength to start again. Lila had found her purpose. Her laughter had returned, not the naive laughter of the past, but the peaceful kind that comes from surviving yourself. She no longer needed revenge. Life had already written it for her. One day, while volunteering at a community event, she heard a soft voice behind her. "Lila?" She turned, and there he was, Marcus, thinner, older, eyes sunken with remorse. For a moment, time stopped. The crowd around them faded. He swallowed hard. I wanted to say I'm sorry. For everything. Lila looked at him for a long moment. There was no anger left, just quiet sadness. "Marcus," she said softly, "I forgave you a long time ago." He blinked, confused. "You forgave me?" She nodded. "Because holding on to hate would have meant you still controlled me. I had to let go, to find myself again." Marcus's voice broke. "I don't expect you to ever—" She interrupted gently. "You're right. You don't deserve another chance, but you do deserve to live with what you did. That's how we both heal." He lowered his head. A tear rolled down his cheek. "You look happy," he said quietly. "I am," she replied. "And that's the difference now." As she walked away, the sunlight hit her hair, and for the first time Marcus didn't see a woman he once mocked. He saw the one thing he could never destroy, her strength. That night, Marcus returned to the desert one last time. He buried the photograph of them beneath the old cabin's porch, a silent apology to the past. Standing there under the fading light, he whispered, "I hope you find peace, because I'm still searching for mine." The wind carried his words away, scattering them across the same sand that once held his cruelty. And somewhere far beyond the desert, Lila smiled in her sleep, peaceful, free, reborn.